This is Join Us in France, episode 60.
Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elyse.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elyse is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller.
Sometimes.
Hopefully today.
Sometimes.
I'm counting on you. I'm counting on you.
Yes.
On today's show, we go back to the Basque Country. As promised in episode 47, there were so many things, lovely, wonderful things about the Basque Country that we didn't get to talk about.
Right.
We couldn't fit it all in one show. So here's more on the Basque Country. Specifically, the three places you told me about were Espelette,
Espelette.
the village of Espelette.
Right. Saint-Jean-de-Luz.
Yes, and
on the coast. And Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which is such a wonderful, strange name. And we'll have to talk about how it got that wonderful, strange name. And a few comments then also, and hopefully some nice pictures of the countryside, which is what makes Basque Country so wonderful.
Beautiful, beautiful place. Okay, so you'll find the show notes for this episode and all our other episodes on joinusinfrance.com. And if you're wondering what other places we've talked about on the show, also go to joinusinfrance.com/episodes, and you can see the episodes map. It's all on a map. Also, I would like to thank listeners who support the show by going to joinusinfrance.com/Amazon to make their Amazon purchases. We've been making just enough to pay for bandwidth, not for our time or equipment or anything like that, but, it's a good start. There is no obligation for you to do this, but if you do, it will not cost you a penny more, and it helps us see that you like the show and you want to support it and keep it going. Normally, a business would track how well they do by how many sales they have, but we don't sell anything. So that's why we need you
We sell our wonderful voices and our entertaining style.
But it's free, right?
It's free.
So since people don't have to give us any money, we don't know how, we don't get a lot of feedback as far as the value of the show to people unless they go to Amazon.com. Sorry. joinusinfrance.com/Amazon, and then that way we find out. Okay, thank you. At the end of the show, I'll read more iTunes review. Now, a little music to get us in the mood, and we'll come back and talk about the Basque Country.
Then again.
You never know. Okay, we're back to talk about the Basque Country.
Okay.
I'm all ears.
She's all ears. So, Euskal Herria to you.
Oh, thank you.
Which
Merci.
means, actually, I don't think you're supposed to say merci. Because actually, what it does mean is the Basque people and the Basque territory.
Oh.
And if you remember from when we were talking about Bayonne, they have their own language.
They do.
They have a very special language.
Yep.
And part of the mystery which gives a certain aura to Basque Country is number one, that it's very beautiful, and we'll talk about why. And you and I have both visited the region. It's very, very beautiful. And also that this is a group of people, and you could guess technically it's considered to be an ethnic group in a sense.
I guess.
Genetically, it's considered to be basically an ethnic group, even though when a person who's Basque is walking around in France, you have no idea that unless they're wearing the beret
No,
and holding,
you don't.
holding the stick that goes with the games that they play.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't go, oh my goodness, that's a Basque person.
No, they look very much
They
like
look
the
just
rest
like
of
everybody
French
else.
people, yeah.
But in fact, I was doing some more reading, and it really is true that now that they're doing all this genetic testing and everything, this seems to be the people who were the very first Homo sapiens in the western part of Europe, at least in the southwest and of France and in the north of Spain. And however they managed to do it, which is what makes it kind of fun and mysterious, at least for somebody like me, they managed to keep their language all of these thousands of years and not mix in as much as other peoples did and blend in so that their ethnicity is really very, very intact.
Distinct, yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting to know. So what is
Maybe they didn't like other people.
Well, as it turns out, and if you read the different things, and we'll talk a little bit later about the Roncevaux and the Song of Roland and all the whole battles
La
of
chanson de
Charlemagne
Roland.
and all of that.
Yeah.
They were warriors. They were a little bit like the Picts in the northern Scotland, if I understand correctly. That is, they never gave in, and they were so ferocious that most people either gave up trying to conquer them, or they eventually went off into the Pyrenees Mountains and didn't mix in with whatever cultures were mixing. Yeah. So that, lo and behold, when it came time to come out again, they literally have a separate language and separate way of doing things.
If they were that
They were that
disagreeable.
They were that let's put it this way. I think they were that strong.
Yes.
Anyway, but just for people to know, and I think a lot of people have traveled to France or have traveled to Spain and France, but Basque Country is both in Spain and in France.
Yes.
And in fact, there are what are considered to be 7 regions that are part of Basque Country, and 3 of them are in France, and 4 of them are in Spain.
Oh, wow. They have their own regions within that tiny little thing?
Well, it isn't that tiny if you think about it, because as far as in Spain is concerned, it's a good chunk of the northwest of Spain, which includes the stretch along the Atlantic until you get practically to Galicia, and that's just north of Portugal. And
right, but size-wise, it's probably the size of Delaware or something. I mean, it's not like a big landmass.
Probably.
Compared to U.S. state.
Right. But then again, nothing compares to let's face it, all of France is only 1/12 the size of all of the continental United States without Alaska. So all of France is, of course, already not that big.
Yeah.
So we're talking, what we're talking about in terms of modern times is that the Basque Country on the French side is basically 2.5 departments, which is like 2.5 counties.
Yeah.
And on the Spanish side, it's a larger area because it's actually what they call an autonomous region. And in terms of the entire population, which is estimated to be approximately 3 million people, only 25% is on the French side.
Okay. All
So we're talking about a minority in terms of the size of the land and a minority of the people also. However, when you go into Basque Country, which, as we mentioned before, and I guess needs to be reminded, is the extreme southwestern tip of France.
Yeah.
It includes the Pyrenees Mountains, and there is no wall or gate that says now you're in French Basque Country and now you're in Spanish Basque Country. And now, of course, that there's the European community, and there are no
borders.
There are no borders. There's no customs people. What you do have is, if you go over one of the several passes that are in the mountains, is that you simply have a little sign that changes from French to Spanish.
Yeah.
And on the Spanish side and on the French side, because it's Basque Country, it's also in Basque.
Right, okay.
It's also in Basque language. So all of a sudden, you say, oh, this is Spain, but it doesn't look any different than it did 2 feet before. It does change geographically as you go down the other side, but then I'll explain that in a minute.
You know
because
how
of
I
the
can tell
mountains.
that I've crossed into Spain?
How?
The road markings are different. They paint the lines different colors, and
do?
the speed limit is different on the freeway.
Speed limits, yes.
Yeah, speed limit is lower in Spain. It's 130 on the freeway. In France, it's 120 in Spain. So that's how I know.
Yeah.
I look at the signs.
Those are good
freeway.
things to remember if you're thinking about driving across. If you have you do have to pay attention. So basically, the part of we're going to talk about French Basque Country, and I'm not. I think it's just we need to mention, but I want to just mention briefly, because that is really not the nature of what we do as this podcast, is to really talk about the political problems that they've had. But I think they need to be mentioned very briefly at the very end, because Basque Country, both the French side and the Spanish side, but more specifically the Spanish side, has been the region of a very big nationalist independence movement that started a long time ago, and that in the the last 25, 30 years took on a kind of violent turn and has now finally calmed down.
Yeah.
So it's no longer a major political issue.
So you want to talk about that at the end?
Yeah, I think we'll just mention it at the end.
Okay.
So we talked about Bayonne, and Bayonne is in a part of Basque Country. It's actually in the department called the Pyrénées-Atlantiques.
Yeah.
And in general, all of Basque Country, we could say, is bordered on the north by the pine forests of the Landes.
Yeah.
It's bordered on the west by the ocean.
Yeah.
By the Gulf of Gascony, which is very famous. It's famous for several things. Why? It's famous because it's from there that many, many of the ships were sent out for all kinds of trading reasons for centuries and centuries. It's also famous for being very treacherous, the Gulf of Gascony. It's a very hard place to navigate. And, of course, the French Basque Country is bordered on the south by the Pyrenees, and the difference between the French and the Spanish is somewhere up in the mountains, but I'm not sure exactly where. I couldn't tell you how far in you have to go before it goes from one to the other.
Yeah, those borders have pretty much disappeared.
They're pretty much disappeared, and luckily for a lot of people in various periods in history, those borders are basically fluid, so people have been able to manage to get one way or the other way through the Pyrenees.
Yeah, the most you're going to find is a sign.
And then on the east, it's basically in the Pyrenees Mountains itself and a little bit of the foothills. And when you get to the east, you enter another region, which again is a region that's a historical region. It doesn't mean when you get into it, you will notice something specifically different. And that region is called the Béarn. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we're talking about a region.
The Musketeers.
The Musketeers.
The Three Musketeers.
The Three Musketeers and lots of interesting wines and things like that. All those things. Okay.
Duck.
We have all of those things, yes. So what makes Basque Country specifically different? Well, in fact, in terms of the Pyrenees, which is, of course, a mountain chain that runs pretty much east-west. It's a slight angle, but it really pretty much runs east-west from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean. What's interesting is that the part that is the Basque Country is the part of the mountains that are the lowest.
Yeah.
They are the oldest by definition, and they are the greenest because there's the most rain. Mm-hmm. And it's very beautiful rolling mountains. The highest peaks are just about not higher than 1,000 meters, a little bit, but not much higher than 1,000 meters. And that makes about 3,200 feet.
Denver is higher than that on the plane.
Right. I mean, it's rolling. For people who are used to the high peaks of the Central Pyrenees or even the Alps, most people consider Basque Country to be more big hills, even though technically they're mountains. Yeah. And one of the things that makes it very beautiful is that it's extraordinarily green because it captures a lot of the rain from the Atlantic. Yeah. It comes off the coast. And so it's very wonderful, beautiful sheep country. Yeah. And that, if you go out of the towns and out of the villages, what you have is gorgeous countryside, lots of wonderful green, like people talked about other parts of the world as being green. I mean, one of the places that's sort of a stereotypical place that people talk about being green is Ireland or maybe parts of England. Well, Basque Country is in that category of green. Yeah. It's lovely. It's luscious. It's green. Lush. And of course, it's lush not in a tropical way, but it's actually a relatively mild climate. If you go into the Central Pyrenees, you have glaciers, you have high peaks that go up to 10,000 or 11,000 feet, and you have areas that are in perpetual snow, and you have glaciers and things like that. Whereas in Basque Country, you may get a little bit of snow on the tops of the mountains at certain times of the year.
A dusting.
But basically, it's more that you have a winter that's wet, mm-hmm. and interestingly enough, a summer that is very sunny. Mm-hmm. And relatively mild. And that's one of the reasons why it is both wonderful for the grazing of sheep, and it's also become, and this I suppose is really what we could say in the last 50 years, certainly since World War II, a very wonderful area to visit as a tourist.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, that's because there are lots of wonderful, beautiful little villages. And the style of architecture, as we mentioned the last time, is very unique with these very lovely houses that have lots of bright colors painted on their half timbering. So it's a very beautiful area to be based in, to rent a place for, let's say, a week or a few days at least, and then drive around because it's an area that's wonderful for doing lots of hiking.
Yep.
You can do wonderful hikes into the mountains, and it's not as rugged or steep as it would be if you go into the central part of the Pyrenees. And you have a lot of these lovely little villages. And so what I thought we'd talk about is 3 places that are emblematic for different reasons. And one of them, of course, is the one that's actually the biggest town that's outside of the Bayonne-Biarritz area, and that is Saint-Jean-de-Luz.
Yeah.
And Saint-Jean-de-Luz is a town that's on the Atlantic. It's actually on the bay.
Yep.
It's probably the one that's as the crow flies, or as the bird flies, as they would say in French, it's probably the one that's actually closest to the Spanish border. It's only really about 10 or 11 kilometers from the Spanish border.
Yeah.
And if you take a train, the famous train that comes down from Bordeaux, or even the one that goes from Toulouse and goes through the foothills of the Pyrenees, and it hooks around the end of the line, because you have to change over to the train tracks that are different in Spain, is at a town called Hendaye.
Yeah, Hendaye, yep.
Hendaye, which I have a hard time saying without pronouncing the H, and I know that
it's Hendaye.
Hendaye.
No H.
And no H, but
Right.
forget it. I can't. It's hard for me to do it without the H, so it's Hendaye, but it's really Hendaye. Okay, Hendaye.
Yeah.
Okay, so what happens is Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Saint-Jean-de-Luz is this very beautiful town that has now become a major resort on the Atlantic coast, and it's very beautifully situated because it's at the inside curve of this huge bay, but also it's below, if you want to call it that, a mountain. There's one specific mountain just nearby called the Rhune, Rhune, which is the French way of spelling the word that is actually Basque, which is Larun, which is Larrun. And it's a mountain by standards of, I guess, geographical standards. It's 900 meters, which means it's just about 2,000 feet high. But if you, is that right?
I don't know.
9 times 3.2. You can figure that out. It's just about 9. So it's just, what am I saying? 3,000 feet. 3,000 feet. Okay.
Yeah,
all
that
right.
sounds more
Sorry for my math. 3,000 feet high. That sounds more like it. And it's really beautiful because there's a road you can take. I've done this before. If you come in from inland going to Saint-Jean-de-Luz, there's this lovely departmental, I don't remember the number, that takes you to the top practically of the Rhune mountain. And you get a really beautiful view down below, because it's one of those mountains where on one side it's kind of gradual sloping, and on the other side it's pretty abrupt. And that's the west side facing the sea. And so if you get up to the top of this mountain, you get a view down below of the valley, and then you get to see Saint-Jean-de-Luz, and then the ocean beyond it.
Well, you're going to have to look up what number
So I'll have to look up and see,
departmental is.
and have to, I think, maybe ask my husband, because he's good at remembering things like that.
Okay, please
and
ask.
It's really great.
I'll put it on the show notes.
Okay, and it's really nice because it gives you an advanced idea or taste of how the Basque Country pretty much ends at the sea. Now, what made Saint-Jean-de-Luz actually, what put it on the map, literally in a sense, is that at first it was the place where a huge monastery was built. And this is going back to the time when Bayonne was actually created, which means pretty much in the 1100s. So the first thing that happened there, and that's why it got its name Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which of course means St. John of the Light. The light. Luz is light. Was because there was this huge abbey there. And it was a monastery. And it was a monastery that was basically run by the monastery and abbey in Bayonne. So it was an extension of Bayonne because it's not that far away. I mean, you can really easily go from Bayonne to Saint-Jean-de-Luz without any problem. You can drive across to the Atlantic and then just hook down, and it's not a very long drive at all. And
maybe back then they used to walk.
Well, yeah, or they had horses. More likely,
maybe
they probably had horses to get them there. But then, and this is what makes it interesting in terms of its history, it became the place that was number one, a major fishing town.
Yeah, and
they claim. I'm not sure who, but if you read the books and it talks about the history of it, they say that the very first sailors to reach Newfoundland in what is now Canada came off of Saint-Jean-de-Luz and whaled. They were basically whalers, and they were fishermen looking for new territory, because there's this big argument now about whether it was the Vikings who were the first people to discover the New World up in Canada, or whether it was the French, or whether it was the Spanish, or whoever. And now there's this new group that's claiming that they were the first ones. They're the Basque, the Basque fishermen.
Why not?
Sailors who apparently were intrepid sailors. And then
intrepid everything.
Intrepid everything.
Yes.
The Basque are intrepid, basically. Whoever out there is Basque is a yay, okay. And then starting in the end of the 1300s, guess what was there? Pirates.
Ooh, this is getting
exciting. Right? And for several centuries, with the sanction of the French kings, because the French and the Spanish were constantly fighting with one another, and they were constantly fighting over where the border was. And in the crook of the Bay of Gascony, you have this town that developed after the monastery, and it was basically these sailors, and they were probably mostly ethnically Basque anyway, but they were loyal to the French king. And so this is a little bit like certain things that happen in the world these days. Even though they were officially pirates, they were unofficially working for the French king.
Mercenaries.
Yes, exactly. I didn't want to use the word, but there you are.
Okay.
So they would actually attack all of these ships that were being probably ships from Portugal and ships from Spain, mostly that were going either up to England or to the northern countries. Sometimes ships that were going around the Rock of Gibraltar, they would go out that far. And whatever booty they got, they would have the part that was theirs and part that was for the King of France. So for a very long time, that was a place that most people who were not pirates, and this is now we're talking the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s.
Yeah.
They didn't want to go there because this was really the place where the pirates set up their territory. It was a little bit risky. And even I guess if you weren't a pirate, I'm not sure how that worked. I'm sure that there were other people who lived there because it was actually a regular town at the same time. And there are still houses in
Saint-Jean-de-Luz, right?
This is Saint-Jean-de-Luz,
okay.
But there are still houses there that are from the 14 and 1500s because the old city center is very beautiful. And it has a lot of old medieval houses. So obviously, even though this was the headquarters of piratry for a certain amount of time, there were other tradespeople there as well. Because even pirates have to eat and live, and things like that.
Pirate needs chairs too.
Pirates needs chairs too. Pirates need chairs too. I think we should do a T-shirt that says that. Pirates need chairs too. And then actually, all of that ended in the 1600s when a peace treaty was signed between Spain and France.
Okay.
And
somehow they convinced the corsair to
I think what happened was the corsair went elsewhere.
Which are pirates, by the way.
Yeah.
Corsair pirates.
Interestingly enough, it doesn't explain why, but what happened was basically by the beginning of the 1600s, you have the end of the war between France and England. You have intermarriages between Spain and France several times. You have Louis XIII and then Louis XIV. They both married royalty from Spain. And so the corsair actually went back. I believe what happened was they went down the coast to North Africa, around where Morocco is, and they went back into the Mediterranean and basically took their trade, if you want to call it, elsewhere. But they stopped marauding right there.
That area.
Right in that area. And it became a more affluent whaling and fishing town. And in the year 1660, and if you remember when we talked about Bayonne, we talked about how Bayonne was the place where chocolate was introduced into France because of the marriage of Anne of Austria and Louis XIII.
Yeah.
And Anne of Austria was not really Austrian. She was the daughter of the King of Spain. It's just that the kings of Spain...
Just to keep it simple.
Just to keep it simple.
Yeah.
In fact, it's very confusing. But the point is that all of the kings of Spain owned Austria. So as a nice honorific title, they would give their children titles that included the name of Austria just to show that they included Austria in their empire.
I claim this.
I
My daughter
claim
will
this.
have
Okay.
this name.
So in fact, in 1660, in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which is really what literally made it so special. And it still has the palace that was used in 1660 in the town of Saint-Jean-de-Luz. Louis XIV, as a young man, and he was young, and he wasn't even, I think he was 16 or 17, he was married to a young woman named Marie-Thérèse, who was the niece of the king. Mm-hmm. She was a princess.
The King of Spain or the King
of Spain?
Okay,
the King of Spain.
Okay.
And he was, of course, I was about to say the Prince of Wales. Whoops, sorry, wrong country. He was the Dauphin. He was not yet king. He was going to be king very soon.
Okay.
And they were married in Saint-Jean-de-Luz.
Okay.
In this very beautiful, beautiful house.
Sounds like a good place to have a wedding.
And that building that they were married in is called the Palace of Marie-Thérèse, and it's still standing from the 1660s.
Palais de Marie-Thérèse.
The Palais of Marie-Thérèse. And what happens is always interesting is that because they were married there and because the entourage, imagine all the French entourage and the Spanish entourage, they come there. And they turned around and it was, I'm putting words in people's mouths, but you can say, oh, look at this beautiful place. There's this stretch of natural beach that is very well protected from the huge waves that are on the actual coast.
Uh-huh.
And it's mild. And so they decided it was a lovely place to do what the French called villégiature, which means a place to go when you want to get away from things.
But I think it's villégiature.
Village. Tell me how.
Villégiature.
It's very hard to say. Okay. Basically,
not a word I use every day. But
it's a good vacation place.
Yeah.
Here we go. So starting in and this is the end of the 1600s. It still is.
It's been a good vacation.
And here we are, right? And believe it or not, the only terrible things that happened to it afterwards were but natural things, because 3 times...
I thought you were going to say Nazis.
No, the Nazis came, but we'll talk about that. But they actually didn't destroy the town. But what happened was that 3 separate times there were the equivalent of tidal waves because of weather conditions that actually wiped out a good part of the town. And it's interesting because it's really I've been there several times, and it's a very beautiful protected bay. So it's hard to imagine that this could happen.
Big enough wave, it'll...
Because in fact, what happens is that north and south of Saint-Jean-de-Luz, you have cliffs.
Yeah.
And it's known for the surfing because there are these huge waves.
Oh, well, then that part is obviously not that well protected.
So it's not that. And so obviously there were certain weather conditions that came about that moved in and destroyed chunks of the town. And
they can have hurricanes and they can have, tsunamis. And I mean, just like anywhere else along the coast. And
it's very strange. So basically there are some houses still standing from the 1600s. There are a lot from the 1700s when it was rebuilt.
Yeah.
And the whole old city center, which is not very big, the town of Saint-Jean-de-Luz has as a permanent population about 13,000 people.
Okay, so it's pretty small. Yeah.
It's pretty small. In the summertime, it will have 3 or 4 times as many.
Well, yeah.
Because a lot of people come through, and they come through, and very often, as I have done actually, you spend a night or 2 there. Some people actually will, this has become very popular in the recent past, rent an apartment or even have a little studio and spend 1 or 2 or 3 weeks there, because you can go swimming in the water in the bay.
Yeah.
It's very well protected. And you can go out from there if you have a car and do all of these wonderful excursions. Yeah. And it's a really lovely place. And the town itself is very beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's got all of these old buildings. It's got a couple of old churches. It's got these magnificent 19th century gingerbread style houses along the coastline.
And it has a lot of character that's different from the nearby regions of France. So even for French people, it's very interesting to go there, because you find yourself in a different environment, without going very, very far.
Without going very far. And being that it's on the coast, it has as food specialties both the typical things you find in Basque Country, which of course means lots of sheep's cheese, lots of lamb, and it also has a lot of fish.
Yeah.
Since it is still really a major fishing.
Yeah.
The town of Saint-Jean-de-Luz itself is no longer a fishing village, but there are fishing villages very close by, up and down the coast. And so there is a lot, of course, a lot of seafood and fish. And so it's a very beautiful town. And it's today a relatively luxurious town.
Oh, yeah.
This
it's not cheap.
It's not cheap. And one of the reasons why is because starting in the early 1800s, you have a lot of the rich people coming from Bordeaux and taking vacation here, going on vacation here. And then, of course, you have the train that takes people from Paris to Bordeaux that goes straight down the coast and ends right here. So you had a lot of Parisians starting to go here as well. And now what you have is a lot of Spanish people who come up the coast, go across, of course, now to the other side.
Yeah.
And, of course, one of the other major things is that it was also a stop on the way to Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle.
Right. That's a biggie.
And that's a biggie. So besides
because people still do the pilgrimage.
Yes, they
people
do.
Still walk it or bike it. Or
they walk it
whatever.
and bike it.
Even for reasons that are not religious.
Yes, a lot of people do it because they love the experience. They have this idea that it's a wonderful experience to have.
I'm sure it is.
And I'm sure it is. I actually know some people who've done a certain stage, just a little one-day part of the pilgrimage route. And they say it's a very, very interesting experience. It's kind of meditative in a way. I mean, it's a totally different experience.
Yep.
And the other thing about Saint-Jean-de-Luz is that it still has part of its walls from the 1400s.
Oh, wow.
Because in the 1400s, since there were all these corsaires, there were all these pirates, there were the abbey and some of the other elements that were not basically pirate elements, decided to build these walls because one of the reasons that the pirates were causing a lot of trouble was not simply that they were marauding, but because of them, the Spanish were attacking Saint-Jean-de-Luz.
Yeah.
So they built
They
these
were attracting
walls.
trouble.
They were bringing trouble.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me that the king would get into that kind of business. It's like nothing but trouble.
It's nothing but trouble, but it was certainly a good way for the king to make money without having to declare it. This is a little bit like, under the table kind of. I mean, the king didn't have to pay taxes to himself,
right.
but it was booty. And very often, the practices were if they kidnapped somebody, they would ransom them.
Yeah.
And so if they found somebody that was a lord or somebody very important, they would simply ransom them.
Well, and there's
back.
still countries where that happens, you
Yep.
know, so thankfully in France, this has ceased. Even when we talk about the Basques being fierce, nowadays, they're very genteel.
They're very genteel.
They're very nice.
They're very genteel, very nice. And of course, most of the people who did this, of course, I don't know how many people would have a genealogical chart in their family that says, oh, my great-great-great-grandfather was a pirate. I really don't think so. But who knows? You never know. You just never know. They might have a little...
Well, somebody must have, ancestors that were pirates. I mean, it has to be.
Now, if you go into the town, what you still can see is a church called Saint-Eulalie.
Okay.
And part of the building is actually still from the very end of the 12th century.
Oh.
Old stuff. It was built by the King of Navarre, and it was started in the 1190s.
Wow.
And so a part of it, of course, has been changed and become a Gothic church, and then it was added on and became something else afterwards. But
so as you walk around the church, you can
walk around, you can see the part that's really old, and it's very close to where the fortifications are. And that makes it very, very beautiful. And up on the hill overlooking the fortifications, you also have remnants of the castle that were built by the same King of Navarre. And that, again, is from the same time period in the early 1200s.
I see.
So you get this sense of history. And, of course, the commercial part of Saint-Jean-de-Luz is lovely because you have these beautiful half-timbered houses. And you have these galleries on some of the streets, some very pretty little commercial streets with lovely shops. It's not very big.
Yeah.
The city center is actually a lot smaller. I the old city center is a lot smaller than that of Bayonne.
Yeah.
But the town itself has spread out because it's covered pretty much all of the bay.
So if you wanted to go there just to visit the city, how long do you think it would take you to visit the church, the Sainte Thérèse castle?
I don't know. I mean, I'm a shopper, so I like looking in windows and things like that.
Yeah.
And they have some really lovely shops there. You could probably do a half a day if you don't want to stop for lunch or dinner. It's a town that I think is worth spending a day in, especially if you go at a certain time of the year when the weather is really nice, because you can go swimming.
Yeah, you could spend a little time on the beach.
You can spend a lot of time on the beach.
Walking the beach, running the beach, whatever.
They have little places where you can change on the beach. It's that kind of very civilized beach.
Yeah.
And it has a kind of boardwalk.
And I remember when we were, I don't know if it was in Saint-Jean-de-Luz or one of the other towns, but the place was packed with joggers. So along the boardwalk, there were dozens, and I mean, this is obviously a very active town.
It's a very active town.
There were a lot of walkers, joggers. Right. This is not a seaside place where all people do is sit and eat ice cream.
Right.
They do that too, but
you're right. It's very, and not only that, but literally outside of the old town is one of the very oldest golf courses in all of France. So and you're right. They do a running marathon. They do a biking event along the coast.
Yeah.
There are lots of sportive events. Now, not to put off people who are a lot younger, but it's known now as a place for young, very athletic, retired people. So you have a very big population of people, I would say, that are in their 50s.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. Yeah. Just walking around the town, that's the vibe I got.
It's not an old people's town. It's like people in their 50s who have retired and still are really gung-ho and very, very athletic. And so you can tell it's healthy. That's the right word for it.
Yes.
And when I've gone there, which is, I guess I've been there 3 times, and it's a great place to eat because they have lovely food and they have a lot of the seafood as well as all of the Basque foods that are, the specialty of the area. And I like it there. It's really nice. It's a very beautiful place, and it's a place where you can do your walking, your running, your swimming. You can. I don't know about the golf course. I don't know what the conditions are in terms of whether anybody can just show up and play golf there. It's not quite the same as here. No, I didn't check.
I'm sure we have golf enthusiasts.
Yeah.
If one of them knows, write it in the show notes.
But anyway,
in the comments.
Right. But it's really a lovely, lovely town. And of course, the only thing is you have to know that parking can be very difficult.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So it's
like any of
these small,
if you go,
very popular tourist
even
places.
If you go in the middle of the winter, I'm sure it's so small and the narrow streets or whatever. Yeah,
you sometimes have to park a little bit towards the outside and to walk in, but obviously that's what you want to do when you go there.
And I don't recall if they have city parking, like underground parking and things like
that.
No, they might have some.
They have some. I remember there was city parking, but it was not big enough to have underground parking. It was just city parking that was just a little bit on the outside of this old city center.
On the street,
But it's fine, and I really like it there, and I would say that it's a lovely place to go. You could actually do next town I want to talk about is, of course, further inland, but not that much not that further away. But you could do a several-day circuit of places in the Basque Country, and you can either do it by staying in one place and then just taking day trips, or you can actually do like a night in Bayonne, a night in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, then go back inland and circle your way around.
Yeah.
That's also a nice way of doing it. So, which is a good way of segueing from Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which of course is now on the coast, to now.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. You have to choose. Are you the kind of person who doesn't mind changing beds every night?
Yeah.
Or are you the kind of person who doesn't mind spending a couple of hours a day in the car?
Right.
That's the question, really.
Right. That's the question.
Because if you don't mind the car, then find a central hotel that you like and drive around.
Right.
Every day, go visit a different town. If you would rather not change beds, then if you Which one did I say? I just forgot.
Bed. Well, the thing is, you have to be in a car to get from one to the other, whether you stay in one place and
You
drive around or not.
But if you change towns every day, like you sleep in a different hotel every day.
Right.
That's where I was going. You sleep in a different hotel every day, and then of course you have a different bed, and you have to do your luggage every night or whatever.
Right.
But then you don't have to drive. You wake up in the morning, and boom, you are in this lovely new place.
New place, right?
Well, so it depends what kind of person you are.
And it also, I've actually done both. We once spent 2 or 3 nights in the Saint-Jean-de-Luz area, and then once did a little bit of hopping around. So I guess you're right. You can do either. Yeah. And it just depends, because if you stay in a place like Saint-Jean-de-Luz on the coast, if you don't want to use your car, you're on the coast. You're going to do ocean things. You're going to go swimming. You're going to go walking and maybe golfing or biking or whatever. Whereas if you take the car and go inland, obviously you get a taste of the inland Basque Country and the coastal Basque Country. So you're right. I think it's a question of what people's preferences are. It's just what you prefer.
It depends on my mood. Sometimes also it's how much time do I have to research hotels. Like if I find one that I'm pretty sure I'm going to like. In one town, I'm like, well, we'll just stay there for a few nights because I'm pretty sure this one is going to be good, and I don't want to go searching for another hotel somewhere else, So that's just consideration.
By the way, and I have no specific names to give, but there are lots of hotels in Saint-Jean-de-Luz.
Yes.
And if you find that the hotels in Saint-Jean-de-Luz are all booked up, you can go outside of Saint-Jean-de-Luz and just south along the bay, you have other little hotels, and they're fine as well, and because they're officially no longer in Saint-Jean-de-Luz, they seem to have a little bit more accessibility in terms of price, and they're not always as booked up as the ones that are directly in Saint-Jean-de-Luz itself, But it's a region that's very touristy, so there's lots of accommodations, really everywhere, right? So let's go inland. Now, you can do this either way. Obviously, you can start inland and go to the coast, or you can start at Saint-Jean-de-Luz and go back inland. And then that will take you to, there are lots of lovely little villages. And I think it's worth repeating that this is an area in general, the whole region, that is relatively touristy. So lots and lots of little villages that are very beautiful, that have some accommodations. But one of the other places that is very well known, and that is, I guess we could say, a very large village or small town, depending upon how you look at things, is a place called Saint-Jean, Pied-de-Port.
Pied-de-Port.
Pied-de-Port. Now, translate that into English is very weird. Saint John, feet of the port.
Yes.
Doesn't make any sense.
Not the port, the pig.
Port. P-O-R-T. Port.
Pied-de-Port.
P-O-R.
C'est un T, c'est pas un C?
T.
Oh, I always thought it was a C.
You always thought it was a C.
I always thought it was
how
foot
funny.
of the pig.
No. Oh, that is cute.
Well, it sounds exactly the same in French.
That is adorable.
Pied-de-port with a C would be a pig, and pied-de-port with a T would be a port.
And that is one of the problems with French.
Well, it's not a problem most of the time,
most
but
of
obviously
the time.
for this
well,
one,
look
it's
at this. Yeah, here we are, right? Yeah, actually,
I don't think I've ever been to that village.
You've never been?
In my defense.
Okay. Well, I have actually, and I've been there. I think I've been there about 3 times, and it's very, very beautiful. It's inland. Now, what I didn't do, and my mea culpa is, I cannot tell you, for instance, because I didn't note down how many kilometers it is if you're coming back inland from Saint-Jean-de-Luz. It's about an hour's drive.
Okay.
I would say it's about an hour's drive, but it's an hour's drive because it's on tiny little country roads.
Yeah.
There is one road that's a little bit bigger, and that actually takes you there.
So why is it called Pied-de-Port with a T if it's not on the ocean?
It's called Pied-de-Port because, and this has to do with the history.
Confuse me.
Of course, this is trying to confuse you. Yes. Because why Saint-Jean is more the question. Pied-de-Port, I can tell you why. Saint-Jean, I can't tell you why. Okay.
John,
it's because, in fact, there used to be, the town itself is at about 350 meters up altitude, which is about a little over 1,000 feet.
Yeah, it's not much. It's not much.
but it's on a spot.
on a hill.
It's on a spot where it's actually the village itself or the town itself is kind of on several levels because it's on a hill. But where it is at the place where the Nive, which is the river that flows into Bayonne, it comes out of the mountains. So this is basically in the foothills of the Pyrenees.
Yeah.
And it joins up with a very small little river. And right at the place where the Nive joins up with this other little river, or this other little river called the Norriban, which is a strange name and it comes from Basque, it flows.
Can you spell that?
It's El Loribar, Laurhiba, and I don't know if it's R or N. I'm being very bad today about things like that. But it's a tiny little river that most people have never heard of. It flows into the Nive, and this is where the town was built.
Okay.
And right behind the town, the mountains go up fairly high.
Okay.
And not very far away is the pass in the Pyrenees where the Battle of Roncevaux was fought in ancient times in 778.
Right.
And at the time, Roncevaux, strangely enough, was the most important town in this area of the Pyrenees. So this is going back really, really far.
Yeah.
And there's a river.
Some of the oldest writings in French are about that battle.
That's right. And so apparently, now this is what I've read, apparently because there's a river that runs through Roncevaux and runs down into this area, when this town was built, Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, it was built around, again, a monastery, which was typical, certainly way back then.
In those days, yeah.
And they said it was the town of Saint-Jean at the foot of the port of Roncevaux. It was underneath where, now the port, what I don't understand and I couldn't find is where exactly this port would have been, because it would have been a river port. It wouldn't have been.
I see.
But in fact, the Pied de Port is that this abbey or monastery was built below Roncevaux, and so that's the way they attributed the name. Now, it's very strange. And
not something you hear about every day.
No, and I don't know if, in fact, there had been another name. I really don't know. I couldn't find anything that indicated that it had another name. Probably it has another name in Basque language.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that name is. I'm sorry to say.
Okay, I'll have to see if I can find
and see if you can find
put it in the show notes.
So what happened was, and again, this is just like with the other things, an abbey was built at this place where the Nive and this other little river join up together. And it was built as a fortified abbey because in this part of the mountains, in the olden times, starting way back with Charlemagne, which is the whole story of Roncevaux, this was disputed land.
Yeah.
And it was disputed land for centuries. So what happened was that this little medieval town was built up around the village, and the village was built up around the monastery, and there's a castle there. And if you go there now, it's still a medieval town. Wow. And it still has parts of its walls, and it has a few of these gorgeous little streets that are these narrow cobblestone streets, and you still have the huge stone archways that are parts of the walls that protect the city. And it's on several levels. So there's a part of the town that's higher up, and there's a part of the town that's lower down below.
So is Roncevaux a city? I mean, a town?
No, this is Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port.
Right.
Roncevaux, there's nothing anymore except a plaque.
Okay.
And that is because what you have there is there are two things that it's a road that you take up out of Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and you take up into the mountains, and you go across the pass where the Battle of Roncevaux was fought, which is at about almost 4,000 feet high.
Okay.
And right where you go from France to Spain, you have this big plaque that says the Battle of Roncevaux.
Okay.
And it was fought right there.
Okay.
And now, so what, we should talk about that. So this is in the year.
Yeah, I don't remember anything about
because
that.
I remember from when I was taking my French classes, even though I never had to read it, that there is this wonderful medieval piece of literature called the Song of Roland.
Oui, la chanson de Roland.
The Chanson de Roland.
Which I have read, but it was a long time ago.
And it's in old or medieval, it's in medieval French.
It's barely understandable.
Barely understandable. It's kind of like reading Chaucer in English.
Yeah, probably.
Probably. Because it was written several hundred
Maybe
years
it's even-
after, okay? It wasn't written in 778. But this is what the story is. And of course, there's a legend attached.
778?
The battle took place in 778.
Yeah, that's old.
That's old. That's really old,
I'm
okay?
still hung up about that battle. It's too long ago.
So this is in the time of Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Charlemagne, who had created an empire out of what is now all of France and basically the western half of what is now Germany.
Yeah.
And he was fighting, even then, he was fighting who, at that time, he was fighting the Saracens, the Moors who had Andalusia. And then there were these little kingdoms in what was, at the time, not even Spain, but there was Navarre, Castile, Aragon. All of these little kingdoms had their own little princes. And Charlemagne was fighting everybody.
Yeah, okay.
Basically. He was fighting against these little princes, and he was fighting against the Moors who had taken the whole half of southern, what would be the southern half of Spain, and were pushing up north. And
already, huh?
Oh, yes, because the Battle of Poitiers, which is much further north, was the battle that was the decisive battle in deciding whether the Moors were going to capture part of France or not.
Yeah.
And they lost the battle in Poitiers, which was also in the 770s or 780s. It was at that time.
Around that time.
And they were pushed back. But they got as far as Poitiers. And in Poitiers, they were pushed back by Charles Martel.
Yes.
Who then was named King of France because he was the hero.
Yeah.
And the Saracens, or the Moors.
So this is after Charlemagne.
This is after Charlemagne.
Okay.
But they were pushed back, and basically, instead of staying in this area, which would now be what we would call the Basque Country, they retreated back over the Pyrenees.
I see.
So that was really a battle that was decisive in what happened in the centuries following that, whether or not there was...
Anyway.
In France, yeah. So we're in the year 778, and Charlemagne sends his nephew, Roland.
Oh, Roland was a nephew.
He was the nephew of Charlemagne.
Well, I also have an uncle named Roland.
Okay.
Very nice name.
Very nice name.
Yeah.
And he sent him, he was the head of a huge part of Charlemagne's army. And he sent him there not to fight at first the Saracen or the Moors, but to fight the Vascons. And who are the Vascons? The Basque.
Yeah.
Because
Of course, they were fierce, so you had to fight them first.
And they were on the south side. They were basically hiding away on the south side of the Pyrenees. And they joined together temporarily with the Moors to create a huge army. And what happened was...
Them's fighting words.
Those were fighting words. And apparently... Charlemagne, he was next La Chapelle. He was far away. He had nothing to do with what was going on.
Yeah, he was just giving orders.
He was just giving orders. Roland made a terrible mistake. He apparently had been a brilliant military man for Charlemagne.
Yeah.
But he chose to gather his army, which was an army of more than 10,000 men, which was huge for the time. And considering that was just a part of the army of Charlemagne. And he chose to try and invade the other side of the Pyrenees by passing through this narrow pass of Roncevaux.
Too hard.
And what happened was that the Vascons, who had allied themselves with the Moors temporarily, set up an ambush.
Oh.
And
they knew the place like the back of their hand.
They knew the place like the back of their hands. And apparently... Now, you try to imagine what it must have been like in 1,200 years ago or more. It's very hard to imagine. But obviously, word got back to them that this army was arriving, and they themselves were prepared when Roland and his troops came up to the top of this pass. Because when you drive across, of course, what is a pass? Well, a pass is, of course, a dip in the mountains that opens up to a bit of a valley. And the rest of it, you have to climb up to the top to the pass, and it's a bit open, and then you climb down the other side. And on the other side, on the south side, it's narrow. And it's very, very narrow. So what happened was Roland and his troops were ambushed, and it was a wipeout. It was total devastation.
Yeah.
He and all of his troops, maybe with a few exceptions, all of them were killed. Over 10,000 men were killed.
Dang.
And it became the major defeat under Charlemagne, and it stopped all of his desire to try and take that territory.
I see.
And he never tried to take it again.
I see.
Tried later on. Other kings, under the French kings, tried to take it again. But at that particular time, that was the end of that. Now, the Song of Roland was written almost 300 years later, at the time of the Troubadour. So just about the year 1000 or 1550, something like that.
Okay.
But they knew where Roland and his troops were buried. And people would use that spot as a place to go, first because it was on the road to Compostelle. So it was already, you passed through Roncevaux to go to Compostelle. And also because it became in and of itself a kind of pilgrimage spot for the valiant soldiers of Charlemagne.
I see.
And so some troubadour, and I don't know if anybody knows actually who.
Which one?
Wrote this very long song that's a poem about the valiant Roland and, of course, his sword. Now, the story is of his sword. And they say that he flung his sword in fighting, and it went into a rock. And that it landed somehow, whether it split the rock or whether there was a crevice in the rock. But there's this myth that's wonderful that the person who can pull the sword out of the rock will be the next great savior and next great hero.
Wait. There's stories like that all over. There's stories like that in England, right? The sword in the rock.
Yeah. This is very it's actually very Celtic, to tell you the truth.
Okay. But so it's there too.
It's there too. It's there too.
Okay.
So, and if you drive up the road to take the pass, you will see that there's a big stone, and on the stone that was put there in the very recent past, there is a kind of beautiful little frieze. I mean, the stone was there. I mean, the stone is a boulder.
But they carved it.
But they carved a plaque with a scene that is a kind of relief scene that represents the battle of Roland and Charlemagne at the Pass de Roncevaux. Okay,
interesting.
So there you are. So of course that is one of the things.
That's a good story.
It's a good
Elyse.
story.
Yeah, it's a good story.
It's really a beautiful place to visit.
I probably knew this, but I forgot it. I totally forgot it.
And I would love to. I don't know. I don't think in my entire life I've ever read any of the verses of this very long poem.
I had to for French literature, and it did not make a strong impression on me one way or the other.
It didn't make a strong
impression.
impression.
I had to study it for a test, so I did. But I don't remember very much about it.
Well, my guess is that it's very similar to in the States having to read a little bit of Chaucer. I mean, you read it because you have to, and unless you're really into middle French or Middle English and that kind of poetry, you may remember that it was about such and such, but you're not going to remember any of the verses itself. Yeah. But basically, this is above Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Okay?
Yeah.
So now, I'll just give an example. I have been to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port several times. I've never spent the night there. There are lovely little hotels there. There are bed and breakfasts there. There are people who do rent places for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks at a time. It's a very beautiful medieval town. It's very touristy. It's a wonderful place to stop to eat because it has lovely restaurants.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place to take photographs. And if you're interested in visiting the countryside, it's a good place to be there. It's a good place to stay for a night, or it's just a nice place to stop for a good part of a day. And I just would like to tell an anecdote because it's typical of something that I think people from the outside don't realize. But if you speak French, it makes it for very interesting. And most people probably don't realize that in Basque Country, there is still a very, very, very strong sense of Basque identity. Mm-hmm. So there are places that are more or less hostile to non-Basque people. It's a fact. Now, most of the very, very open touristy places like Saint-Jean-de-Luz, which is on the coast, are different because they're used to having people come and go.
That's their livelihood. I mean,
Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port is a little bit different. It lives off of tourism, and it needs the tourists.
But it's not happy about it.
But it's not necessarily happy about it. And it reminds me of some other places I've been to. And so this is what happened the last time. This is a couple of years ago that I was there. I decided I was with my husband, and he wanted to have a coffee, which was fine with me because he loves to stop in cafes, and I like to look around and everything. And it was relatively cold out, but he, because we know what he does, he smokes. So bad man. He was sitting outside, and I said, I don't want to sit outside. I'm going to go in. And it was this very nice cafe in this old, beautiful stone and half-timbered building. And it was cozy inside. It was really pretty inside. And I thought, I'm going to do what I like to do. And I went over to the counter and just sat on a stool at the counter. And the guy that was behind the counter, he looked at me and he said to me obviously in French, but in a very kind of aggressive, nasty way, he said to me, "What do you want?" Mm-hmm. And I kind of was taken aback because I thought, this is weird, And I said, "I'd like a coffee." And he started to say to me that it was not possible to have a coffee. It was very strange. This was a very strange experience. This is why I'm talking about it. And I looked at him, and all of a sudden he said to me, and this is in French, okay? Because obviously I don't understand Basque. He'd just been talking to somebody next to him in Basque, and of course I don't understand a word of what he was saying. He said to me, "You have an accent." And I said, "Yeah, I have an accent." He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm originally from the United States, but I live in France." And then he said, "Oh," and he gave me this big smile, and he gave me this very nice coffee, and I started to ask him about what it was like to live in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port.
Okay.
I asked him, he said he was from there, and he told me his son went to the local, there are 3 elementary schools in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port because they take kids from the villages in the hills, and there are some really remote villages. And he said to me that he took his son was going to one of the local elementary schools, and it was the school where they were learning
Basque.
in Basque.
Right.
And
kind of immersion school.
And so I said to him, I didn't ask him about the fact that his initial reaction to me was relatively hostile. I mean, it was very strange. Yeah. He became so friendly with me, and he started talking about his ancestors who had gone to the United States, because a lot of Basque people in times that were really hard left and emigrated to the United States. And a lot of them are in New England, and a lot of them are in the West. But I was struck afterwards, because afterwards we had this lovely conversation, and I asked him about what it was like to be Basque, and how he wished that there was more that they could do that was actually in their language. And even though it's a place where people really do keep their culture, we wound up having this wonderful long conversation.
Right.
And afterwards, when I left, I thought it reminded me of once when years and years and years ago, as a child, I had gone with my family up to Quebec province. Mm-hmm. And I remembered people saying that a lot of times I don't know if it's still true, but in Provence, in Quebec, if people didn't want to, they would say that they didn't speak English. They spoke only French. And it was the same feeling. That was the same feeling I got.
Well,
it's very strange.
So maybe this is a good time to bring in a
little bit about the politics.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because what happens is any place where a language was repressed.
Right.
Because let's be frank about it. A couple 100 years ago, people all over France still spoke their regional dialects.
Languages. Exactly.
But the French state, when they instituted school for every child, including females, and France has been doing that for a long time, where parents who did not send their children to school were could get in big trouble with the law.
Right.
It took years to enforce this, okay? But it worked in the end. And what happened at school is you had to speak French, proper French. And they would really repress the language. Now, in Spain, they took it a few cranks more seriously than that.
Seriously.
They would actually imprison people for speaking, Catalan or Basque or whatever, which explains why in Spain they have even more of this fervent desire to preserve their local languages. You see that in France to some extent, but France was a little bit more subtle when it came to enforcing French as a national language. At home, you could speak whatever you wanted.
Exactly.
You never got in trouble for speaking Basque or whatever at home. But in school, it was heavily enforced. So politically, in France, the reaction, this nationalism about being Basque, is not as strong as it is in Spain. They probably have grievances that I don't know anything about.
Well, there are. And in fact, one of the problems is, and this is why, as you say, it's less problematic on the French side, in French Basque Country, than in Spanish. However, since the people themselves consider themselves Basque, and even though some of them are Spanish Basque and some of them are French, and most of them speak both languages anyway, what happened was that the repression on the Spanish side also had a lot to do with what was happening during the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah,
because
Franco and all that.
Since the Basque people have maintained through all of these centuries a very separate, very strong identity, it was also one of the two parts of Spain, particularly, and this affects, of course, France, Catalonia and Basque Country were the wealthiest parts of Spain.
Yeah.
They were the industrial parts. They were the parts where people had a good living and where the standard of living was a lot higher. And it apparently was the two areas that were the most repressed by Franco, so that they put a lot of people into prison in both Catalonia and in the Basque Country, partly because of their desire to have their separate ethnic and linguistic identity, and partly because they were the ones that were the most Republican and against the regime of Franco.
Yeah.
And so what happened was a lot of the people who were involved in that either fled across the mountains to the other side, which is why you have a lot of Catalonian people on the southeast in France, and why you have a lot of the originally Spanish Basque people who moved up to the French side, but they maintained this political fervor.
Yeah.
And as far as I understand, what happened was that once the Spanish Civil War ended, which of course coincided with World War II, and the Spanish basically repressed the Basque people all during the regime of Franco, which lasted until 1976 when he died.
Yeah, that's a long time.
It's a long time. And so there's this enormous resentment, like in a pressure cooker, that built up.
Yes.
And the nationalist separatist movement grew out of that.
Yeah.
So it was much less.
And it kind of propagates into the French Basque Country. But on the French side, I think you don't see it quite.
No, you don't. It became a place where a lot of the people who were involved in the organization in Spain, which was called ETA.
Yeah, ETA, yeah.
ETA. A lot of the people would go and hide on the French side because, of course, they could go visit people who were also Basque. But there was never any of the major events that happened on the French side. But I guess what rubbed off is this... I know some people who are Basque, and they're Basque French. And so, it's like being from Brittany and being French. I mean, they have family.
They have both.
They have both. And their grandparents or great aunts and uncles have a house in the countryside, and it's a great place to go and visit and spend time. But they don't need to assert this kind of thing. But what was strange about this encounter in this cafe was the fact that I thought he was not embarrassed to basically show me that he was basically a Basque nationalist.
Yeah.
And I thought he would never have done that if he hadn't realized I was a foreigner.
Right, with a French person.
With a French person, he would never have done that. But it was also that it was inland. And I know from experience that when you go into the mountains in various parts of different countries, that is where you will find groups of people who are the most insular to even though this is a town that's very beautiful and really works on it survives because of tourism and money from tourists. You have a closed-in population. The population year-round in Saint-Jean-de-Luz is about 1,200.
Right.
They hang
Small.
It's small, and so you have this kind of this feeling that never goes away. It was a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
It really made an impression on me.
Yeah.
And again, it's not an overt hostility. People who go through this area all the time, tourists go through all the time.
Yeah.
It's just
This
that
guy might have been having a bad day or something.
it's also interesting to know that there are very few, but still, as you mentioned, that 100 years ago, almost all the regions of France, people spoke their old dialects.
Yeah.
And there are still, to this day, 2 or 3 regions like that. And of course, this area is one of them. This is one of them.
Right.
So,
And in France, when I first moved back to France, this was interesting to me because this is the time where, so this is 10 years ago, this is the time where around where we are, around Toulouse, people were starting to push for Occitan in the schools.
right.
Which, growing up in Toulouse, I never heard or was taught any Occitan.
Never.
It never even entered into anything. And my brother has one of his best friends is also a local from Toulouse, and he was very politically active in starting a school, a elementary school, kind of a maternelle, so that's like kindergarten kind of grades, in Occitan.
Uh-huh.
And it worked. So they opened the first kindergarten where your children could do everything in Occitan. And I had a conversation with him once about this because it was so strange to me that he would be pushing Occitan when his wife, so the children's mother, is Portuguese.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, why don't you just teach them Portuguese?
Right.
And Occitan is kind of not a very useful language, teach them English or Portuguese or something. And he told me something that I've never forgotten. If you only ever teach languages that are useful, then you're just going to be teaching English, Spanish, and Chinese. Mm-hmm. All the others will disappear. Because these are the 3 that are useful, and maybe it'll boil down to just English in the end. And so he's like, for children, it's good to learn a second language.
That's true.
And it turns out that it doesn't matter which second language it is. If you want to teach them Occitan or Basque or Catalan or Spanish or Thai or whatever.
Right.
It's really good for them to learn a second language, and it doesn't have to be a useful second language. So he kind of changed my mind on that.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And of course, there is a resurgence, I think, in a lot of regions in France of local languages as a way of catching the spirit of the past.
Yeah.
So besides, I totally agree with you about language learning, and I think it's always good to learn another second or even third language if you can.
Right.
But it's also that there's, instead of repressing these things, it's like we are entering a new era where everybody wants to be proud of the past. And I think what makes that even funnier is that if you live in Basque Country and you learn Basque, but you're not Basque, or if you live here and you learn Occitan, but you have no roots here, people go, oh, how nice. But, it's just sort of like local folklore for a lot of people. They just learn it,
Which is good. I think I wish I had learned some Occitan when I was little, because then I wouldn't.
Well, now you just sit on the metro and you can learn a little bit from listening to the stops.
That's kind of silly.
So maybe we should finish the last little spot I wanted to talk about for Basque Country.
This episode is going to be long.
It's going to be a long one. I didn't think we were going to do a long one, but it's true that the whole question of Basque identity is actually a very, very interesting one. And I just
not one we'll ever stop talking about.
No,
really.
we won't stop talking about it. And it is true that it is one of the few regions of, at least on the French side, where a lot of people still speak that language. And if you go into little villages, and we were once invited to a tiny little village up in the mountains above Saint-Jean-de-Luz for a festival. And it was one of those barbecue games type of festivals that they have, because it was a woman whose family was from there and who we were invited to spend the weekend at her house. And she said to me, when we go, they have this huge tent in the middle of the village. You know, it was in the summertime and everything.
Uh-huh.
She said, don't be upset. She said, you're not going to understand a word that anybody's saying to each other. When they talk to you, they'll talk to you in French, and it's fine.
Right.
But they're going to talk to each other in Basque. And
Because
sure enough, that's what they were doing.
Yeah,
you
this
know?
is their opportunity.
This is their
to
opportunity.
speak Basque. Why wouldn't they take it?
And you know, it was fine. There was no bad feelings. It was just like, this is our language. You know? So a town we mentioned, or I mentioned very briefly when we were talking about Bayonne, because we were talking about foods and things like that, and is not very far from Saint-Jean-de-Luz and is absolutely gorgeous. And that is the little teeny town of Espelette.
Yes.
Now, it's actually not as teeny as you'd think, because it turns out that as a year-round population, it actually has more people than Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, strangely enough. But that's because it's a village that is called a commune, so it has the outlying areas as well. And it is, as the crow flies, literally only 10 kilometers from Spain, going south into the Pyrenees. Mm-hmm. It's on a very beautiful little road, and it's about a half an hour from another town that we're not going to talk about because we can't talk about everything. But there's a town called Combeau-les-Bains, which is where there are some thermal baths, and it's also in the foothills.
Yeah, if it says les bains, it means baths.
Right. And why is Espelette famous? It's famous for these wonderful little red peppers that are an AOC. They are actually now also an AOP. AOC means Appellation Contrôlée from the origin. It means that these are a certain kind of pepper that is a specific variety of pepper, and it's grown in this area on this soil. And now the new etiquette or label, it's from the European community, which is the AOP. And apparently,
first time I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's called AOP, and they got it in 2008. Appellation Origin Pays. So one is the one that says it's really from this town and the hills around the town. That is the AOC, and the other AOP is the European designation that it's specifically from this town and this countryside. I would trust the AOC more personally
because it's older. Yeah,
it's older.
Yeah,
but whatever.
Yeah.
The name of the town comes from the Basque Espelette. Not very different for once.
Yeah.
It's almost the same name.
Yeah.
And the town actually goes back to the 1200s. Mm-hmm. And when you visit it, I was very much surprised because I remember we drove in, coming up, back up from the coast, actually. We went to Espelette first and then wound our way back down. And I was expecting something relatively modern. And on the outside, you can see it's very affluent. There are some very large, beautiful hotels on the outside. There are lots of bed and breakfasts nearby. And once you get into the town itself, it's gorgeous and it's medieval. And it's just gorgeous, gorgeous little town.
Yeah, it's a very nice little town.
And because of the wonderful red of the peppers, all of these houses with their half timbering are painted red.
Yeah, they're red and white.
And they're red and white. And since I love red, and I was just like, oh, what a happy place to be.
It is really very nice.
It's very lovely. And of course, it's not very big, the old city center. In the summertime, they have almost 20,000 people coming through all the time. Mm-hmm. They have a festival in October, in the last weekend of October, which is the Piment d'Espelette Festival, the Pepper Festival. Yeah. And then what they have there, and for any of you out there who are shoppers, which is a terrible vice to have, but I have to confess it's one of mine, the shops in the town of Espelette, not only do they sell the powder, the peppers, all kinds of beautiful charcuterie, which is one of the other things that they specialize in around there, but they have ceramics and tea towels and mugs and hand mitts. And I bought a few of these things and gave some of them as presents because I think they're really lovely. And everything is with this wonderful red and white. So it's really pretty.
It's a very nice little town. I visited myself and liked it very much.
And of course, one of the food specialties is charcuterie.
Yes. Charcuterie. Yeah. But you could spend a very nice half a day walking around, looking around, taking pictures. Going into I don't remember them, but I'm sure they have a pretty little church.
They have a lovely little church. They have a castle that's actually up on the hill just outside. They have a church called Saint-Etienne. The castle was started in the 1100s and is one of those castles where a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It went from the 1100s all through into the early 1700s. And the castle, which is typical Basque because the walls are painted white, so you can't really see how old it is by the stone. The castle is now the administrative center for Espelette, so it has government administrative buildings in it.
So you wouldn't visit it.
So you can visit the outside. You can't really visit anything but the entranceway on the inside.
Yeah.
But it's really kind of pretty to see, and it has this lovely little old church. And I would say it's a really nice place to spend a few hours or half a day.
Yeah.
It's a very nice, and again, is as beautiful as Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port is, and it's very mysterious, and it's built on this river, and it has this old Roman-looking stone bridge. Something about Espelette is very cheerful.
Yeah.
And so it's a kind of fun thing to do.
So depending on what mood you're in.
Depending on what mood you're in.
Go see them both.
Go see them both.
Yeah.
You can do a circuit. You can definitely do a circuit that works your way around. And these are just 3 places that are a little bit different, one from the other, but typical of all the kinds of things you can visit and see in the wonderful Basque Country.
That's great. And this is going to be driving on country roads.
This is driving on country roads.
Yeah.
Yes. You can get to Saint-Jean-de-Luz on a big highway. Once you leave Saint-Jean-de-Luz and go up into the countryside, you have the roads are in good condition, but they're definitely country roads, and it's wonderful for taking photos.
Yeah. I'm going to have to go back just to do that. Because I visited before I got into photography, you see. There's a pre-photography visit and a post-photography visit for me.
That's true. And you get lots of sheep and lots of beautiful pictures of the rolling green hills.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, we better stop because we are going long.
We're going on too long.
I'm going to see if I can close the show today with a typical Basque song.
Oh, my goodness. Oh, yay.
Called Egoak. But I'm going to have to see if I can get permission. So if I get the permission, that's what you'll hear next. If I don't get the permission, I'll cut that bit out of the show.
You don't want to give us a little... No, I can't.
If I can't get the permission, I don't want to get sued, sweetheart.
Oh, that would be so nice.
And it's a song that choirs all over France sing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like their anthem or something.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very nice
I hope
song.
we get it.
Okay, all right. So I told you I would read some iTunes review before we close. So let me try and go fast. Somebody who calls himself, this is from the USA iTunes store. Somebody who calls himself the French wannabe, haha, like Elyse.
I am French. You are American. Let's just accept the reality.
But your passport, you don't have a French passport, do you? So you're a wannabe. Okay. I thoroughly enjoy these podcasts. I had the chance to live in France and work for a nonprofit for a year in Évry. Now that I'm back in the States, I love to listen and be reminded of my time in France, especially like the podcast about French culture and about day-to-day life in the country. If I keep listening, I may just have to move back. You make me miss it so much. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you, French wannabe. Another person called Dogster, virtual vacation every week. This is such a wonderful podcast. I look forward to hearing everything they have to say every week. The 2 hosts complement each other perfectly. I have been to Paris twice in my life and never realized how many things outside of Paris are also must-see destinations.
Good.
I may just have to move to France to see it all.
We may have half of the United States moving to France with us.
Somebody called Saila, Sailah, says, great for planning. I am taking a short trip to France in a month, and this podcast has been invaluable resource for my planning. In fact, it has made me want to spend more time in France.
Wow.
See, that's very nice. Yay right, says, magnifique. A great podcast by 2 very knowledgeable women, I don't know about me, but who know both the American and French cultures and languages. Their combined wisdom on food, history, culture, faux pas, gotchas, and more is perfect for the American preparing a journey to France. Worth your time to take a listen. Thank you very much. Backpack 68 sorry, I must not be saying these names properly, says, so useful. I keep learning more and more about my favorite country with every episode I listen. This is a great resource if you ever plan on visiting France. Keep them coming. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Robin L47 says, I love this show. I look forward all week to listening to Elyse and Annie discuss my favorite subject, France. They are both so knowledgeable and personable. I am planning a 3-week trip for next week to southwestern France, our neck of the woods, and Paris. And their show has given me so much information and inspiration. Now, if you ladies could only do an episode about the Dordogne. We did, didn't we? In the meantime, that was episode 40...
Something recent.
48, maybe 47. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much, Robin. Well, thank you, Robin, for taking the time to write us a review. Just 2 more and then I stop. Polo Palooza says, wonderful. Not only do these ladies provide accurate information, they are affable and entertaining to boot. Highly recommended, whether you are an active traveler or an armchair enthusiast. Merci bien, mesdames.
Merci.
Merci, Polo Palooza. And Richard Pulisi, it's an Italian name, says, Paris and France from the residence view. What a great find produced by 2 women with an obvious zeal for all things French. I've been cramming the episodes since I discovered them last week. Can't wait for my trip next fall armed with my newfound knowledge. Merci, mademoiselle. Okay, we're a bit too old for mademoiselle, but we'll take it.
You may be. I'd still
She
rather.
says.
I said yes. All right, let that one go. Okay.
Thank you,
everybody.
listeners. Remember to go to joinusinfrance.com/Amazon if you want to show us a little love when you buy something on Amazon. Thank you. We'll talk to you next week. Au revoir.
Au revoir.